Welcome to Save the Nation Today. I'm Hannah Catherine Smith. President Biden has unrolled his fiscal year 2023 budget, and in it are quite a few green initiatives. So here to break those down, as well as the current state of energy policy, is James Taylor, president of the Heartland Institute. James, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So from your expertise, what are some of these budget lines, proposed budget lines, that you at the Heartland Institute are most concerned about?
Well, the one that jumps out at us is Joe Biden bragging that his budget has $45 billion in discretional spending on climate programs. Now, keep in mind, this is just his discretional spending. It doesn't account for the tax breaks, the taxpayer subsidies that solar panels, solar equipment get, that wind manufacturers get, et cetera. This is just his discretionary spending. And if you put that in perspective, $45 billion, that's more than $300 per household this year, just in additional spending on climate change, where we know from surveys of the general public that most households would not even want to pay $100 total to address the climate crisis, as they call it.
That's incredible. I can certainly think of many other things I would like my $300 a year to go toward. Now, we often hear from people on the left that criticize people center right, saying, you don't care about the environment, you don't care about climate change. What would you have to say to those people that maybe are skeptical of this criticism in terms of government spending on green initiatives?
Well, I think we have to remember that environmental issues are much more than carbon dioxide emissions. So the solutions that are being promoted by the Biden administration and climate activists are by and large wind power. And yet Harvard University scientists who believe in a climate crisis, they examined how many wind turbines would we need to replace conventional electricity with wind power, which is what the Biden administration wants to do. And they found that we would have to carpet literally 1/3 of the American landmass with wind turbines just to replace a conventional electricity. And if we electrify transportation, which they're pushing as well, literally 1/2 of the American landmass would be covered with wind turbines. You talk about environmental devastation. You talk about the destruction of wildlife habitat, the killing of birds and bats by the millions, et cetera. This is something that if you truly are an environmentalist, and especially if you are a land conservationist, which used to be the core of the environmental agenda, is conserving land and conserving open spaces, then you should be extremely concerned about the Biden administration's climate initiatives.
So obviously, from what you're saying, the environment is very important. What are some more free market solutions that you have toward addressing these issues?
Well, the free market takes care of many of these issues without even having to get government involved or even think tanks involved. So, for example, the fracking revolution that took off approximately a decade, 15 years ago, as a result of technological advances in hydraulic fracturing and in directional drilling, we're able to produce much more natural gas than used to be the case, and at very low prices. What that has meant is that the electricity that used to be provided by coal power is now being provided by natural gas. Natural gas reduces carbon dioxide emissions by 50% relative to coal. Keep in mind that technologies, even technological advances in the coal industry, mean that coal power is much more environmentally friendly than has been the case in the past. But as a whole, what it means is that we are now emitting 70% fewer pollutants into the atmosphere through our electricity generation than was the case just 30 years ago. This is something that we don't need government to direct. It's free market forces that are leading this charge.
Now, final question for you, James. Obviously, in 2021, with the new administration, we saw quite a bit of policy changes from the Biden administration. How has energy policy, that approach, and policy that has either been proposed or implemented changed from the Trump administration?
Yeah, well, you see it at the gas pumps. What's happened is the Biden administration, Joe Biden has fulfilled his promise to seek to squeeze out all conventional energy production and push wind and solar power in its place. When you do that, when you restrict the supply, when you forbid the new production of oil and natural gas on federal lands, when you block the Keystone Pipeline, when you shut down the ANWR oil and natural gas production, when you do all these things, you severely crimp supply, which means prices go through the roof. The biggest difference is the Biden administration does everything possible to shut down American energy production, whereas under the Trump administration, we realized that energy production here in America was good for our economy, good for jobs, good for American national security, really good for anything you can think of. It's better to have American domestic energy production rather than begging foreign nations for it.
Absolutely. Well, the outcome is certainly tragic, and I know so many Americans are feeling the weight of these decisions in their wallets. James, thank you so much for joining us today on Save the Nation Today.
Thank you so much for having me on.